February 5, 2014. On this day in Texas, a lethal injection was administered to 59-year-old Suzanne Basso. She became the 14th woman executed in the United States since 1976, when the temporary ban on the death penalty was lifted. Women account for only about 1% of all executions in the U.S. Now I'm gonna tell you about 10 cases. 1. Suzanne Basso crime. Murdered her mentally disabled fiancé. Execution date: February 5, 2014. Age at execution: 59. Age at the time of the crime: 44. In 1997, Suzanne Basso convinced 59-year-old New Jersey resident Louis "Buddy" Musso to move to Texas so they could get married. Musso, whose mental capacity was akin to that of an 8-year-old, purchased a cheap engagement ring for his bride-to-be and traveled to Texas. 2 weeks later, his body, bearing multiple fractures and signs of torture, was discovered in a park. Before disposing of the body, the perpetrators attempted to clean it with household cleaning products. The victim's identity was confirmed after Basso, pretending to be concerned, reported his disappearance to the police. The investigation did not take long. Basso's 26-year-old son, who lived with her, confessed everything during his first meeting with law enforcement. It was revealed that a group of 6 people tortured the disabled man for 2 weeks, attempting to coerce him into signing a will in Basso's favor and taking out a life insurance policy. If Musso died a violent death, Basso expected to receive $60,000. As the mastermind behind the abduction, Basso was the only one of the 6 suspects sentenced to death. 2. Kimberly McCarthy. Crime. Murdered her 71-year-old neighbor. Execution date: June 26, 2013. Age at execution: 52. Age at the time of the crime: 36. Kimberly McCarthy was convicted of the brutal murder of her 71-year-old neighbor, a retired college professor. McCarthy struck her victim on the head and mutilated her. When the victim's diamond engagement ring wouldn't come off, McCarthy severed her finger. Using the victim's Mercedes, McCarthy drove to a friend's house to purchase more illegal substances. McCarthy's conviction was repeatedly challenged in court. Her attorneys argued that she was a victim of racial discrimination, as the jury that convicted her had only one African-American member. In her final statement before execution, McCarthy said, "This is not defeat. This is victory. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to Jesus." Kimberly McCarthy became the 500th person executed in Texas since 1982, solidifying the state's position as the leader in U.S. executions. 3. Teresa Lewis. Crime. Murdered her husband and stepson for insurance payouts. Execution date: September 23, 2010. Age at execution: 41. Age at the time of the crime: 33. In 2000, Teresa Wilson began a relationship with Julian Lewis, a father of 3, and the couple soon married. In 2001, one of Lewis' stepsons died in a car accident. His father received $200,000 in insurance compensation, as the son's life was insured. In August 2002, Lewis' other son, a soldier preparing for deployment to Iraq, insured his life for $250,000, naming his father as the primary beneficiary and his stepmother as the secondary beneficiary. Later that year, Teresa befriended 2 younger men, both over a decade her junior. She entered into sexual relationships with both and eventually convinced them to commit murder. On October 30, 2002, Julian Lewis and his son were shot to death in their home. Teresa waited 45 minutes before calling 911. However, her plan failed when Julian, despite his critical injuries, whispered to the police, "My wife did this." In court, attorneys tried to argue that Teresa was close to being mentally incompetent. Her IQ was only 72, barely above the threshold of 70, below which a person is considered intellectually disabled. Nevertheless, Teresa was sentenced to death, while her accomplices received life imprisonment. 4. Frances Newton. Crime. Murdered her husband and 2 children. Execution date: September 14, 2005. Age at execution: 40. Age at the time of the crime: 21. On April 7, 1987, 3 members of Frances Newton's family were shot to death in Texas: her 23-year-old husband, her 7-year-old son, and her infant daughter, who had yet to turn 1. Newton claimed that a drug dealer her husband owed money to was responsible for the murders. However, the police were not convinced. Just weeks before the crime, Newton had taken out insurance policies on her husband and one child, which would have paid her $100,000 upon their deaths. Relations between Newton and her husband were strained, as both were involved in extramarital affairs. From her first interrogation at age 21 to her final words before execution at age 40, Newton maintained her innocence. Human rights activists, including Amnesty International, pointed out that the case relied solely on circumstantial evidence. They also questioned how she could have committed the murders, disposed of the gun, and fled to her cousin's apartment, all within 20 minutes. 5. Aileen Wuornos, crime. A prostitute who killed her clients, claiming self-defense against attempted rape. Execution. October 9, 2002. Age at execution, 46. Age at the time of the crime, 33. Aileen Wuornos, nicknamed the Death Maiden, is one of the most infamous female serial killers in U.S. history. In court, she claimed that she shot and killed 6 men in self-defense. According to Wuornos, all of them had raped her or attempted to do so. In 1992, she was sentenced to death. She was also accused of a 7th murder, but the victim's body was never found. 10 years after receiving the death penalty, Wuornos abruptly dismissed her legal team, who had been working to save her life. She confessed to being a prostitute and admitted to killing her clients because she hated people. After they'd pick me up and park in the woods, I'd pull out my gun and kill them. I deserve to die. That's the right thing to do. There's no point in living anymore. I need to go. I'll never change, Wuornos stated. Her story shocked America so deeply that it inspired multiple films, books, and even operas. The most notable portrayal of Wuornos was the movie Monster, in which Charlize Theron played the infamous killer. The film focused on Wuornos's relationship with her lover Thierry Amour, referred to as Selby Wall in the movie. In 2004, 2 years after Wuornos's execution, Theron won an Oscar for Best Actress for her role. 6. Linda Leon Block, crime. Shot and killed a police officer with her husband. Execution. May 10, 2002. Age at execution, 54. Age at the time of the crime, 45. Linda Leon Block was sentenced to death for a murder she committed alongside her common-law husband, George Sibley, in 1993. The incident occurred in a parking lot outside a shopping mall as the couple traveled from Alabama to Florida. They were fleeing charges of assault and battery. Block exited their car to make a phone call at a payphone, leaving Sibley and his stepson in the vehicle. Their car caught the attention of Sergeant Roger Motley, who approached and asked Sibley for his driver's license. When Sibley began explaining why he wouldn't comply, the officer reached for his revolver. Sibley grabbed his own gun and fired first. Motley took cover behind his patrol car and returned fire. Block rushed to her husband's aid, opened fire on the officer, and fatally wounded him. At their trial, the couple claimed their actions were in self-defense, but the jury was not convinced. Both were sentenced to death. Block became the second of 14 women executed in the U.S. since 1976. She was executed in the electric chair. 7. Lois Nadine Smith, crime. Killed her son's former girlfriend. Execution. December 4, 2001. Age at execution, 61. Age at the time of the crime, 41. Lois Smith was sentenced to death for a murder committed in 1982. The victim, 21-year-old Cindy Bailey, was traveling in a car with Smith and her son. Smith began questioning Bailey about rumors that she had threatened to kill her son, with whom she'd previously been romantically involved. Despite Bailey's denial, Smith attacked her, first strangling her and then slashing her throat. Bailey was still alive when Smith and her son took her to Smith's ex-husband's home, where her ordeal continued. Smith retrieved a gun and shot Bailey multiple times. 9 bullets were later extracted from the victim's body. At her trial, Smith took full responsibility for the crime, reportedly in an effort to protect her son. Her testimony likely spared him the death penalty, resulting in a life sentence instead. Smith was executed on December 4, 2001. 8. Marilyn Plants, crime. Murdered her husband to collect insurance money. Execution. May 1, 2001. Age at execution, 40. Age at the time of the crime, 27. In 1988, housewife Marilyn Plants hired her 18-year-old lover and his friend to murder her husband, the father of her 2 children. She promised to pay the hitmen after receiving a $300,000 insurance payout that she was entitled to in the event of her husband's accidental death. The young men severely beat Plance's husband in his own home. Realizing the attack wouldn't look like an accident, Plance instructed them to burn the body. The assailants drove the still living man to a remote area, doused his truck with gasoline, and set it on fire. According to forensic analysis, he died from carbon monoxide poisoning inside the vehicle. Plance and her lover were executed by lethal injection. The third accomplice cooperated with authorities and received a life sentence. 9. Wanda Jean Allen. Crime. Murdered her lover. Execution. January 11, 2001. Age at execution. 41. Age at the time of the crime. 29. Wanda Jean Allen was convicted of killing her partner, Gloria Leathers, in 1988. The two women met in prison and were living together at the time of the murder. Shortly before the incident, police were called to intervene in a heated argument between the couple at a store. The women, both agitated, could not be calmed. Later, Allen fatally shot Leathers outside their home. At her trial, Allen's defense cited her history of mental illness and alleged intellectual disabilities, but this did not sway the court. Allen became the first black woman executed in the U.S. in nearly half a century. Her case garnered widespread attention and raised questions about racial and gender bias in the justice system. She was executed by lethal injection. 10. Christina Marie Riggs. Crime. Killed her two children. Execution. May 2, 2000. Age at execution. 28 years old. Age at the time of the crime. 26 years old. Christina Riggs was a nurse and single mother from Arkansas who committed a horrifying act in 1997. Struggling with financial difficulties and battling depression, she decided to end her own life but wanted to kill her two children first to spare them from what she believed would be future suffering. She injected her children, 5-year-old Justin and 2-year-old Shelby, with potassium chloride, a substance she had access to through her profession. However, her plan did not go as intended. Justin survived the injection, and Riggs suffocated him with a pillow. She used the same method to kill Shelby. After killing her children, Riggs wrote a suicide note explaining her motives and attempted to take her own life by overdosing on antidepressants. However, the suicide attempt failed. She was found alive and subsequently arrested. At her trial, Riggs claimed she acted out of love for her children, but her explanation did not sway the jury or the judge. She was convicted and sentenced to death. On May 2, 2000, Riggs was executed by lethal injection, becoming the first woman executed in Arkansas in over 150 years.